Alright, continuing on with our horror theme, as I said, our threat this week gets a little smaller now. With two movies that have gone on to be considered cult favorites. That's a term I feel like is thrown around a little too much, but in these particular cases, I think that's fitting. Because they're... Well, obviously one is much more from the Grindhouse era, and is just all about the shock and awe of it all. Or maybe more. And then there is, It's Alive, which is more like, you look at the cover and you expect something more along the lines of Rosemary's Baby, but, well, not exactly. So, I think we're going to go ahead and start with It's Alive, which is, a movie that immediately gives off a decent vibe, because when you read up on the history of it, it's clearly a movie that the director really had to fight for, and he never gave up on. Because when it was made, this would have been back in like '74, and he had, to my understanding, he had made a deal with Warner Brothers, but then by the time it came to release the movie, the executives had changed, so they decided that they didn't want the movie, or they didn't really care about it. They didn't really have they didn't see future prospects for it. So it got a limited release and then disappeared. So when the Warner Brothers executives changed 3 years later in '77, he asked them to re-review it, and then it got its release. The one where they redid the ad campaign, and it ended up bringing in over $7 million. So he stuck by its side for 3 years and finally got it the release it needed to have. And that immediately says something about the pride in his product and how much this movie means to him personally. So you look at it, and it just kind of looks like a schlocky monster movie, more or less. And that's pretty much what it is, but there is a lot more under that surface. And you just look at the names behind it, like, there's no real recognizable faces in the cast. The director isn't exactly a household name, but you do have Rick Baker effects and a Bernard Herrmann score. So it's like, there's definitely something here. There has to be. And so you look at it and you go past, like, this very bizarre opening credit sequence where it just looks like a bunch of flashlights or something. Something very almost alien about it. And then it goes on and you realize that it's pretty much exactly what it plays itself up as. I imagine the people who are disappointed that Rosemary's Baby is, like, all build up and then finally one tiny little payoff right before it ends. I imagine the people that don't like Rosemary's Baby, they were expecting this. Just if I had to guess. And looking at this movie, there's actually something I want to bring up before I go into anything else, and that is the movie's appearance. The way it's shot and all that stuff. And it's very boring and uninspired in regards to its aesthetic. They try a little bit, like the way they do the blurry POV for the baby, but for the most part, I feel like it's a very bland-looking movie. And so one day I was watching it, and I decided to experiment a little bit, because I was getting a vibe from this movie. And it was like the way the characters talk, and just kind of the way it looked in general, and the story itself. Normally, okay, let me be clear about this. This is normally something that I wouldn't recommend, and I think it's something that people put a little too much stock in, because, I mean, you can do it for fun, sure, but as far as an artistic look, because the color in movies is a lot more complex than a lot of people think it is. So, but every now and then you hear about people who like to give a movie a more classic feel by turning the color completely down on their TV and making it black and white. And it's like, I get it, but at the same time it's like, there are movies to where you would think that would really work, but it's like there's a lot more going on in, like, the color scheme than you would expect, to where it's not always that easy. But this movie in particular, I have a hard time watching it any other way after I did that. Because there's so many things going into it, like I said, by the characters talk, and then how the whole plot just kind of feels a bit old-fashioned. and it feels like it's in that era of like the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers or them. And so when you watch it and you see the way it's shot and like the shadows, it's like watching this with the color turned down just in black and white really makes the movie stand out in a way that it doesn't in color. And that's without even any other tampering. That's just turning the color down. And it just really has this look about it that you would never suspect watching it in color. That this movie actually is really visually appealing if it just didn't have the bland-ass colors in it. And so you take the color out entirely, and it looks amazing. It actually, if you have seen enough movies from that era, I guarantee that if you watch It's Alive in black and white for 5 minutes, you'll completely forget you're watching a color movie from the 70s. And it'll look like something you just happened to catch on TCM during a horror marathon or something. And it's crazy how much it really changes. And there are scenes that already had a certain look about them that actually look even better. The blurry POV looks better. The white, when the milk is rolling down the road when he attacks the milk truck, looks so much better. It looks so much brighter and just really adds this whole kind of ambience to it. And that's... Yeah, usually that doesn't really work. After a while, it's just kind of like, oh, that looks kind of cool, but overall, it just doesn't fit. I do honestly feel like It's Alive should have been in black and white. And like I said, if you just go and watch, it's like, it's really hard to see it any other way after you have. In those scenes, even the dark scenes, like the tunnel at the end, look better. It's really crazy. So I really highly recommend doing that, which is something I typically don't do. And it's like a whole other experience. It really is. I know it sounds like not a whole lot, but really it is, especially if you're a fan of movies from that older era that still have this kind of same schlocky monster vibe to it. And that also adds to it with the fact that even though this movie's kind of known for its gore, weirdly enough, because there's really not that much in it, it feels like it's more suggested that we do occasionally get those shots, like the brief close-up of his mouth as he's chewing on the flesh, but it all goes by real quickly. So there's really nothing about this movie that makes it feel of its era, except maybe the way some people are dressed. Or the way their other son just maybe looks more modern than he would back then, but still, it really, really works. So I really highly recommend doing that for this. And so going into the rest of the movie, the very interesting thing this movie does, I was talking about the pace, too. The pace is also something that makes it feel very old-fashioned, but also is a strength of the movie because it becomes much more about the characters, and specifically our lead here. And I like the approach they took to where, in any other movie, when this were to happen, usually it'd be everybody's in panic, and it's like, well, we gotta get out the guns, we gotta do something, we gotta figure out how we're gonna do this, it's hiding in rooms, it's being attacked and all that. But the approach to this movie is, oh, so my wife just gave birth, the baby is a mutant, he's running around tearing people up. And he's like, well, I've really got to take the attention away from myself for the sake of the media, and I just got to try to get back to work. And that's what we go on for a while, is he's like, let's just try to get back to normal life and deal with that as the problems arise. Which does something really interesting and kind of takes this in the direction you're not expecting the genre to do. So I do find that very interesting, because it's really like, it's seriously just a case of, yeah, it's my baby, yeah, it came out of my wife, yeah, it's a mutant killing people, but it's like, what can I do? What can I really do except try to go back to life? It's like, that's everybody else's problem now, or whoever's going to try to take it out, the doctors, the cops, whatever. Not my problem now. I can't do anything. Which, of course, changes as the movie goes on, because, talking about this lead character, Frank, it's a little on the nose that his name is Frank, but I get it. So you look at the title and you realize it's the famous line from Frankenstein. And I remembered, one of the things that really stuck out to me about this movie the first time I saw it was the first movie I saw where somebody finally acknowledged the fact that Frankenstein is the Colin Clive character and not, in fact, the Karloff's monster. So he says he was reading. It was when he read the book in high school that he found out that Frankenstein was the doctor and not the monster. And then he has that little kind of internal conflict, and it's like he comes to terms with the fact that to see how their identities have gotten so skewed over the years, where when you hear the word Frankenstein, you think monster and scary and horror and all that, when it's like, when Frankenstein was the human being, and he was the creator of the monster, so which one is the monster? And he starts to have those feelings about himself. It feels very obvious, but it's still a very cool approach to this guy's internal conflict, and how it brings into this movie quite seamlessly the same themes. Like I said, the only thing I think they go a little overboard on is the fact that his name is Frank. Like, everything else is okay, and I don't mind that it's so straightforward in what it's trying to say. And on top of this as well, going on the fact that they don't just have it to be a monster attacking movie, they also have a nice little mystery that gets to unravel. Like, there's so many possibilities. Everybody has a different theory on how, like, what caused this. And it's mainly just people saying, oh, well, you know, it's this, or, you know, it could be this, and then there's hardly a conclusion, and then it's the unraveling mystery of how it acts, like, what's motivating it to do what it does. Like, for instance, go to the school that their other son happens to go to. So there's a nice little mysterious thing around it here, which is helped by the fact that the baby hardly has screen time. I think the picture on the back of this DVD case is the best look we ever get of him. Because he's always being covered up, or he's in the shadows, or he's in the bushes, and when we see him, we do see him, but it's very brief. Like, it almost immediately cuts to something else after we've seen him. So I really like the way that's handled. And also going on, it's kind of like, you go into this, and it's like, I would say that people do expect this when they go into Rosemary's Baby, if it turns out that they don't like what they get with Rosemary's Baby. But even so, by the look of it, and the fact that I believe that, this is still, I still think people aren't quite expecting how character-driven this is. Because not only do we have all that with Frank, but his wife as well, where she has that very kind of motherly instinct towards the baby. And she has that moment where she's like, I just kind of want the family to be together. And that's really all I want. And it's like a really heartbreaking thing as the movie goes on, as they become more and more like parents to it. And those instincts just kind of start to take over, where it's, obviously that's like the whole theme pretty much, is just the whole kind of unconditional love thing, and how it's like the fear of being a parent. This is just like a really like overblown exaggeration and personification of those fears. But it's still a very interesting direction, because he could have just made some random monster movie and then have been done with it. I think this spawned a couple of sequels. I think he was on an island at one point. And so it's like, it could have just been that, but he did try to put a lot more in here than you would expect from this kind of movie, and it really is done in quite a poignant way. Like, it's not just like, he basically just made a monster and he tried to throw this stuff in to give it meaning, but it doesn't work. It actually does go along with the movie, especially with the way it's done and the way that they don't hardly focus on like the gore aspect or the horror aspect. So it's still not a movie you're really expecting it to be what it actually is. And yeah, and just that whole idea of basically him having to own up to what he's brought into the world, and it's like, that's the case for any parent, but like I said, it's really just this big kind of exaggeration of that is what this movie is. They make it very movie-like and cinematic and all that. So yes, it's certainly an unexpected movie if you really look at it in those terms. You could also just watch it as a monster movie. The stuff is not overbearing enough to where it would take away your enjoyment if you just want to see a mutant baby kill people, with only occasional glimpses of him. So I even love when you can, like, even when it seems like it's like a big reveal, when we finally see him in the sewer and we get probably our best look at him when he's got his hands on his face, and it's like immediately Frank goes to wrap him up and he covers the camera with his coat or whatever, and it's but it's still, I think it's still enough to please people that are looking for either one, if they want to find a deeper meaning in it or if they just want, you know, what feels like an old-fashioned monster movie. Like I said, just turn the color down a little bit, and it really adds something else to it. It really adds like a new personality to it, and kind of this old-fashioned way about it, and yeah, then gives it kind of the classic feel. So yes, now going on to Basket Case. Like I said, we're definitely going into Grindhouse territory now. This is the kind of movie that you would have like seen at a drive-in in like 1981, I think is when it was. And the interesting thing about this is how much they, like, obviously you can get kind of a look of Belial on the cover here, but going into it, like even on this DVD menu, it's like they really build up what he looks like and what exactly he is. On this DVD menu, they have the scenes where everybody's asking him, you know, what do you have in that basket? And then, like, it goes and goes and goes, and then just as he's about to open it, and then they just really kind of keep you in that suspense. And then, going forward, and we do, I mean, obviously we do have that opening scene. This is kind of like what my complaint with Pumpkinhead was, where it's like, we know it's like something because we see the hand in the opening, but I like the fact that it's okay because that's all we see. Like, there's still a nice little tease there. And the scene actually plays into the plot. So, like, this is the movie starting. The plot is starting in this scene. So it's not just a, hey, here's a tease of our monster, this has nothing to do with anything. It actually, this is where the story's starting. So I thought that was really well done. And then just the mystery, once again, this is a movie whose pacing is very deliberate for the kind of movie that it is. And so we see our main character walking, and he's got his mysterious basket. And you realize that one of the things the director really wanted to convey in this movie was just how fucking seedy New York looks. To my understanding, he loves New York, but one of the big reasons he loves it is just how fucking shady it looks. And it really fits the environment of this movie. I don't know if I could go as far as the cliche to say New York is practically a character in it, but it is very much, the setting is very important to the movie and the feel of it as a whole. So he gets to this hotel, and it's kind of like you think about like Rocket's Red Glare and Big or something, when Hanks gets there and just everything is like scary, even though it's just a hotel. And it's like, even though we know there's like a monster in his basket and all that, and we know this is going to be some gruesome horror movie, it's like when he gets to the hotel and he's dealing with the people, when you see these different characters, if you didn't know anything going in, if you hadn't seen the opening scene with the hand, and if you didn't know what was in the basket, you would think this was just an innocent dude that came to New York, and it was this hotel and the people in it that are the sinister threat. It's kind of, and there's just something so kind of weirdly off-putting about the characters, when like the woman who gets like weirdly attached to him as he's first gets there, and she's like walking up the stairs with him, and just what seems like in mid-conversation she just abandons him and walks back down the steps. And it's like those people alone just kind of give you this kind of sinister horror vibe, and it's like they're not even the threat, they're just weird people. And it turns out that obviously he's pretty much the threat because he's carrying Belial around in his basket, and feeding him cheeseburgers and all that. And I do like how much they go to conceal his face, because they really build it up for a while, what exactly he looks like. We just hear him, and like I said, we've seen his hand at this point. But there's just so much you can go through your mind if you don't know what he looks like. There's that horrible anticipation, horrible in a good way, anticipation of what exactly is he, and what does he look like? And the movie just toys with you for a long time about that, and really makes you wait for it. And I do like the initial reveal, too, where it's like a fake-out, because obviously we know how small he is, and most of the time he's on the floor, just kind of crawling around, or scooting around. And The thing here is, so anytime we're expecting somebody to see him, they'll likely be looking down. So we just kind of, our focus is down, down, down the whole time, because it's like, that's where he is, that's where he could be anywhere. And then his first reveal is when the guy opens the door and the lights come on, and he has climbed up the wall, and he's in the door frame. And it's like, I love that little fake out, because it's like, the first time you're expecting to see him, you're looking at the floor, because that's one of the only places he can be, but no, this motherfucker can climb. And I love that first look, and he's fucking creepy as hell looking. Like, he's very much one of those really memorable movie monsters that isn't on the pedestal that the others are. But once you've seen Bilal, you never forget what he looks like. And he's got that shriek and the teeth, and when his eyes go red, it's freaky shit for how cheap he is. And that's kind of the endearing quality too, is how you could say, you know, oh, there's nothing scary about this because the whole movie looks so cheap. Like, you can tell, like, that's what I'd say, though. It's kind of endearing in the way that it's so cheap that the effects are decent for their budget, and the fact that you can kind of tell how everything was done. Like I said, it may take away the creep factor, but there's still just something that's enjoyable about watching it when you see, like when he's scooting around tearing up the room, it's like, it's so obvious, stop motion. When he's digging through the drawers or whatever, it's so obvious, it's like gloves that are made to look like his hands, and it's like a dude just doing this. There's the moment when he kills the first doctor, and the dude has, like, blood coming out of his mouth, but you can, like, very clearly see him bite down on something before the blood starts to come out of his mouth. And it just seems like this, like, it almost looks like a cheap movie your friends made, and usually I say that as a criticism. But there's just something about this movie that just really works. Like, there's such a charm about it, and its grossness, and the way it just really goes for it. And it just feels like one of those movies that was just really made... It's a movie that feels like it was made with love. It really does, despite the content of it. And it does have those moments when, obviously, like I said, it's a very Grindhouse-era movie, so bad acting is just going to come with that. I know sometimes it's very easy to criticize that in horror movies, but in this particular era, it was almost like... it would just seem like the movie was taking itself too seriously if it didn't have the bad acting in it. And there's something... This movie's never taken itself too seriously, pretty much ever. Except for maybe our somewhat tragic ending, but for the most part, which was ruined by 2 sequels, but... but yeah, it's pretty much throughout, and then there's, like, stuff like when he says, when he's talking to the girl, and he's like, you know, you have to go, I don't want him killing you, and he, like, violently shoves her, and it's like, she's not even fighting him. She's not even fighting what he's saying, but he's just so aggressive with her in regards to keeping him away from her. And that's the thing, too, is another thing that kind of goes with this genre and this, you know, style is the very fast romance. It's like the first time they meet is in the office, and it's like, hey, you know, I get off work at this time, and they just go out for a day, and then they're kissing and in love. And it's just that fast. They've known each other for like 24 hours, if that. If that. Very quickly. So, but that's not really... It doesn't matter with this movie, because all it matters is getting to the next big moment and the next memorable moment. And this obviously drives a lot of what this character does. And not only do I think it's just not, it doesn't have to take itself seriously, it feels like it's intentionally funny many times as well. Pretty much any time Belial is treated as something normal when he's so clearly abnormal or in an abnormal place. Like, for instance, when he's getting read a bedtime story, or when he's just having a casual conversation with our lead character while he's sitting in the toilet. I do also like that reveal when, it's one of those kind of, you're always looking for him and is he in the expected place or not thing. When he's underneath the pillow, I always thought was a really cool reveal. And this is another movie also where I don't mind the use of flashback, because usually it's kind of like, you want to keep the mystery of what the thing is. Kind of like It's Alive did. Um, and but we do get the whole thing. I think the monologue that he gives is like really unnecessary because we're about to see it play out anyway. Um, but we do get to see that flashback, and I do like the way that it plays out. Once again, still being very, very cheesy, seemingly intentionally. There's the moment when the dad is just having his big, my son's not a mutant thing, and the he's my son, the mutant isn't thing. And like while he's doing this big scene, he like almost directly looks into the camera at one point. Like I said, it almost feels like it's intentional with just the vibe this movie is going for. And then just the old-fashioned vibe to it, to where it's like when we actually see the surgery taking place, they're playing like what sounds like mad scientist music. That mad scientist music just really kills me. And then obviously going on that effect as well, I was talking about the special effects with him, but also some of the sound effects too during the surgery when we just hear that tearing sound. It's just really, really unpleasant, but in like the movie's just basking in it in a good way though. Like the movies of this era did. And so, and like there was the point where Rex Reed has a very famous comment, I think, yes, it's on the back of this case, where Rex Reed just said Basket Case is the sickest movie I've ever seen. And apparently he didn't mean that in a good way. And it was the director himself that had asked him this question. And they actually had to fight with him for a while before he finally said, fine, you can put it on the posters and the advertisements. And you wonder, like, where exactly the sickness comes from, but you look at him, he himself as a creation is just really fucked up. Just the whole fucked up vibe. The whole surgery aspect. But then you're like, yeah, but is it so sick after that? Because you look at the way he kills people, and it's just kind of like slashes to the face. And it's like, yeah, okay. You got, like, the scalpels and stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay. But, it's still very, Freddy Krueger, stuff like that. Very normal slasher. But then we get moments like the father's death, the saw, where we just see him from the bottom just split. And that's all we need to see are his legs, but we get the just enough to where it's just as effective as if we had seen it. And then the most disturbing moment with the love interest's death. When we get it makes you think that Reanimator may have taken a little bit from this with the vibe they were going for. And I like that they're not completely clear as to what happened. You almost, like, if it's not entirely clear to you, you kind of have to, if you read around, it will become more clear to you what exactly was going on in that scene. But I think most people will be able to tell, and it's like, oh, okay, now I see where people think, this is pretty fucked up, this is pretty reprehensible. But I think it all fits in with the vibe, and it all just has, like, it's sick and twisted from the get-go. And it's like, if a movie like this that starts off sick and twisted, you gotta know. It's only gonna get more sick and twisted as it goes. And for that to be what's pretty much our climax, yeah, that was him kind of saying, I'm just gonna take this as far as I can go, and this is where we're gonna end up. And I really just think it works in context, so yeah, I do understand where people think it serves no purpose other than shock value. But you can tell it's a movie that really takes its time, and that stuff that's supposed to be there, the really shocking stuff, is not all the movie is. Because it takes its time to get to that stuff, and then when it hits, Jesus. And like I said, it's the guy where you can just tell the writer-director, like, really loves his characters, and he loves his product, as I was talking about with It's Alive as well. And that's really the strength of these movies, and it's finally, because this is one of those times where, once again, people were just not cooperating with the artist here, and he basically got it taken away from him in post-production, and they basically did what they were going to do with it. And apparently he was not all that... It's not so much that he was totally, completely displeased with the final product, but I guess it didn't feel to him like it was his. But then when the Blu-ray came out in 2011, he was finally able to get his version out there, so... yeah, I'm not quite sure where this DVD lies, but... I know this DVD was from, like, 2001, I think. They did this nice little reissue with this company, so... yeah. So, yeah, that's what these are. They are movies that were just made with love in very gruesome ways, about how the monsters may not always be big and in our faces before they attack us. Maybe they're down there. So, as far as what I prefer, I think that, given that I don't have to, alter Basket Case to get much more enjoyment out of it, I think Basket Case is more of a success at what it wants to do than It's Alive is. But I do appreciate It's Alive's themes and the things he wanted to throw in there. The Basket Case just really takes its concept and its era and just really uses all of it to its strength that it can. And I think it really stands out in a big way, in a much more memorable way. So that's probably why I prefer Basket Case. So, yeah. Alright, I believe we have 4 of these to go. 2 more for next week and then 2 the following, and then October will pretty much be over. So, bummer. So, yeah, we're about halfway there. Next week there'll be more reviews as well in between these, so the same old shit. So, that's what you have to look forward to if you are. So, yes, hopefully this was informative, and that's it.